Today's daf is daf kufches, and we're up to Rav Sheshes, which is 5 lines down from the top. Rav Sheshes have a Yosef betanisa kol mali Yomi de Pischa, and we're trying to figure out why it was that Rav Sheshes would fast the entire erev Pesach. Neighbor, we say the Kosos Rav Sheshes samuch lemincha gedola tanan. Perhaps Rav Sheshes accepts the opinion that our Mishnah, when it says that you stop eating samach lemincha, it means mincha gedola, which would mean that from the beginning of the 7th hour, in the middle of the day, you have to stop eating. Mishum pischahu. And the reason why the Rabbanan made this issur is because they're afraid you get so preoccupied with eating, you get carried away, you won't fulfill the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. Dilma mimshich the asilim nuemi lemevad pischahu. He will come to a situation where he won't be able to bring the Korban Pesach because he ran out of time. He's so preoccupied with his Seudah. But now we have to add another element into the equation. V'savar la ki ha di Amar Rav Oshia. And Rav Sheshes accepted the statement of Rav Oshia, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Machshir hoya ben b'seira b'pesach sheshchato shachris b'arba'asar lishmo. It means that the earliest time for the Korban Pesach would be Shachris. The entire day from daybreak on the 14th of Nisan is fitting and suitable for the Korban Pesach. Umitzafrizman Piskahu, therefore, the time of Korban Pesach begins with daybreak, and therefore, since the Zman of Hakrovas HaPesach begins with daybreak on the 14th of Nisan, the Kuli Yoma Chazi LePischa. The entire day of the 14th, from daybreak until Shkia, is suitable, is fit for the Hakrovas HaPesach. This summer, according to Ben Beseira, how do I interpret the pasuk? V'shachatu so kol kahal adas Yisrael bein ha'arbayim. What does it mean that the shechita of the Korban Pesach, the Torah says in Parshas Bo, we'll read it in Mitzvah Shem in the Maftir, the Shabbos, bein ha'arbayim. What does bein ha'arbayim mean? And he understands it means bein erev the esmol, yet the erev la idna. So bein ha'arbayim means between two erevs. One is the erev of yesterday, as we enter into the 14th, and the other is the erev of the day of the 14th, as we enter into the 15th. And we divide up that time from Amud HaShachar to Shkia, and we say that that period of time from Amud HaShachar to Shkia is suitable for the Korban Pesach. And according to Ben Beseira, it comes out that even though the main time for Korban Pesach is after Chatzos Hayom, but nevertheless, b'diavad for sure, you could be makriv the Korban from the morning. So the Gemara argues now that Rav Sheshes accepting the shita of Ben Beseira was noeg not to eat during the entire course of the day, because the Yisrachiu on Erev Pesach depends upon the Zman HaKrova. And any time that's Mutaf HaKrova, you're not allowed to eat in order not to be carried away with your food so that you don't bring the Korban Pesach. Amri, the Gemara rejects it. Lo. You don't have to explain that Rav Sheshes is standing on the shoulders of Ben Beseira. Shani, Rav Sheshes, the Istin is Haba. Let's not make too big of a deal about it. Let's understand the nature, the makeup of Rav Sheshes. He was an Istinis. Rashi says that an Istinis is an Adam Me'unag Umefunag. He's very sensitive. In other words, he gets filled very easily. And the Tom B'tzaframidi, even if we to eat early in the morning for a breakfast, L'urta, by the time it gets dark, almost a full day later, 12 hours later, Lo Havi Mahani Le Michla, he would not be Ochel L'Teyavan Ba'erev. He easily got filled, and in the same day, even after the sun sets, he would not have an appetite for eating. That's the makeup of Rav Sheshes. And it wasn't that he was on a diet. He was just simply an Istinus. Therefore, he had to make sure for himself to avoid eating on the entire day of the 14th in order to guarantee that by Erev, in the evening, he'll be matzah l'te'oven. If he would eat during the day of the 14th, he would not have a te'oven for matzah. So that was Rav Sheshes. That's the story of Rav Sheshes. And the Gemara, just to summarize, vacillated back and forth about the underlying reasoning of Rav Sheshes. Why did he fast the entire 14th of Nisan? One interpretation is that the reason for the Isra Achil on Erev Pesach is because of the Korban Pesach, and the entire day, based on Ben Beseira, is Roy L'Shchitas HaPesach. The other interpretation is no, the reason for the Achila is to guarantee that you'll eat matzah litei avon, and Rav Sheshes was an istinus, and therefore he would have to fast that entire day. Going on in the Gemara, the Mishnah tells Zafilu Oni Shebisrael Yochal Ad Sheyesev, that even a poor person needs a seba on the night of Pesach. Itmar. Now, at this point, we want to understand, when am I required to do a seba? Let's pinpoint the most important points during the course of that evening of the Seder on Leil Tesvav that I require a seba. Number one, matzah, tzarech haseba. Matzah means you have to recline on your left side, kederech b'nei chori. And that's because the nature of matzah is that it's zecher legu'ulas Mitzrayim. And even though matzah is called lechem oni, and it also indicates and reminds us of the poverty of the oppressed people of our forefathers during the Golus Mitzrayim, because they had to eat matzah, that's all they could get their hands on. And the Mitzrayim probably wanted these slaves to eat matzah because matzah sort of fills you up. But on the other hand, the pasuk says, "Lo hispik b'tzekom," that matzah is indicative of what they ate at the Exodus at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So it has that element of zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, and therefore, to show derech cherus, we demonstrate that with a seba. What about maror? Maror, on the other hand, is a symbol of slavery. Ain't tzarech haseba. Now, if we read the Gemara literally and translate it as ain't tzarech haseba, he doesn't need haseba. It sounds like if he wants to, he could do haseba. It could go either way. There's nothing problematic about haseba. It's just not a requirement, because the maror is zeichel merirus to the avdus of Klal Yisrael Mitzrayim, and haseba is not something that would enhance your achil of matzah. And that's how the Beis Yosef and Simon Tov Ayin Hey Paskins, that haseba with regard to maror is optional, and you make your decision whether you want to do haseba during maror or you don't. Either way, there's no obligation. However, the Magen Avram disagrees, and he holds that you would only be yote if you recline during the eating of maror b'di'evet. But certainly l'chatchila, we want to avoid haseba, because haseba is antithetical to the very purpose of eating maror. Now, what about haseba during shtiyas yain? We have 4 cups of wine. So the halacha here, quoted by the Gemara in the name of Rav Nachman, Itmar Mishmei Rav Nachman, is tzarech haseba, that the Daled Kosos require haseba. And this again reflects the idea of derech cherus. Haseba is derech cherus, yain is derech cherus. Itmar Mishmei Rav Nachman, ain't tzarech haseba. Now, at first glance, it seems that we have a different tradition in the name of Rav Nachman, just the opposite, that yayin does not require haseba. V'lo pligi, the Gemara reconciles these two. Ha b'tarte kame kasi kamoi, ha b'tarte kasi basroi. There are 2 sets of kosos, even though there are 4, but we divide it up into 2 and 2. The first 2 are related to the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We begin with Kiddush, which is Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we end with Gal Yisrael. So we have 2 cups of wine that are drunk during the period of time of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Then we have the meal, and for Birkas Hamazon we require a 3rd kos, and then we have Hallel, and that's called Nirtza, and there we have a 4th cup of wine. Now, the Gemara has a distinction, a division between the first 2 and the last 2. One of these 2 sets requires a haseba, the other doesn't. Rav Nachman, when he said you don't need a haseba, he's referring to that particular set of 2 kosses that doesn't require a haseba. And Rav Nachman's statement that we require a haseba was referring to that set of to other cups that do require a seiba. So either you do or you don't, but it's 2 and 2. Now, let's try to figure out and match which set, the first of 2 kosos or the second, requires a seiba. There were those who were of the opinion that the first 2 cups require a seiba, not the second. And there were those of the opinion that the first 2 cups did not require a seiba, the second 2 cups require a seiba. One opinion is Trei Kasi Kamoy, boy, the first 2 require a seiba. And what's the logic that there's a chiyuv haseiba dafka during the first 2? Now he's beginning to tell the story of Cherus. He has recited the Haggadah, the story of Geulas Mitzrayim, and it's appropriate that when you complete that Haggadah of Sipritzis Mitzrayim and Cherus, that's when you should be doing Haseiba derech Cherus. Trei Kasi Basroi, on the other hand, the last 2 kosos, lo boy Haseiba, why don't they need Haseiba? You've already told the story of Geulas Mitzrayim, and there's no continuous obligation of derech Cherus. Once you've completed the entire Magid, culminating with Gol Yisrael, you drank the second kos, you're finished with Sipritzis Mitzrayim. And the reason for the third kos is because of Birkas Hamazon, to be Masada the Bracha al Kos. And the fourth kos is a Halal kos. I mean, you could always ask the question, why do we recite Halal on a kos of Yayin? We don't find that during the rest of the year. But be that as it may, you've already got Yitzias Mitzrayim behind you, and therefore there's no longer requirement of Derech Hasei. So the second opinion was that Adrabah, on the contrary, Trei Kasi Basroi, those 2 kosos, at the end of the Su'ud, at the end of that Seder, boy has said they require a Seder. Why? He shaita to Kohavya Gerus, because that's when he's already achieved, so to speak, Gerus, right? Chayav Adam Lirusis Atzmo, he's already finished with the Magid and told the story of the Haggadah, including the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim. He's now exited from Mitzrayim. He's on that very exciting road of being a Ben Chorin. Now it's appropriate to have a Seiba. But within the context of Magid, we integrate both Maskil Bignutz, which is Avdus, and Mesayim B'Shvach. So it's not appropriate to go all the way with Derech Cherus during the course of the first 2 kosos, because at that point he's still telling the story of Maskil Bignus of Avodim Ayinu L'Far Mitzrayim. Now, one question that we might raise here is, how do we reconcile the first opinion that the first 2 kosos require Haseiba with Matzah? I mean, if you're going to tell me that the first 2 require a Seiba, Matzah is later, and it would seem to be more connected to the second set of the last 2 kosos, and yet you're telling me no a Seiba in the last 2 kosos, well, why are we doing a Seiba during Matzah? Apparently, even post-Magid, when we're in the second half of Aseder, we are still involved in Sipur Geulas Mitzrayim, and we've left Avodim Ayinu behind. Haraya, we are reclining during Achilas Matzah. How do we paskin lahalocha? And as you all know, we paskin that all 4 cups require the same. Hashta ditmar hachi, vitmar hachi. We have 2 opinions. Is idi v'idi boya seva. Both the first 2 and the second 2 require a seva. Based on the suffix, we don't know which 2 require a seva, and we should be machmir. And here, the Rishonim, the Ran, and others ask the question, well, has Seba's only requirement midrabanan, is certainly with regard to Dalit Kosos, and we have a principle, suffix drabanan, lekula. And they say that we don't apply suffix drabanan lekula because it's not a big tircha to require to ask of him to do a Seba. And the Ran offers another answer, and he says, Im nekel b'shneim, if we'll go Suffolk Lakula for both sets of Kosos, Tisbatel Mitzvah Lagamri, we'll end up without Hesema. And that we can't do. So Suffolk Rabban Lakula cannot undermine and invalidate the entire mitzvah. We have a mitzvah Hesema. We have to fulfill that during the course of Dalit Kos. So we don't know which Kos. And therefore, we're going to require, but we really only have two choices. We're excluding a third choice. Either we do a Seba in all four Kos, or somehow you're going to make a Achra L'chumra with regard to either the first set or the second set. And the third option is, let's apply Suffolk Rabban Lakula and drop the ball, completely omit Seba. And by process of elimination, the second two possibilities are excluded. We're not going to be able to choose one set over the other because it's a Suffolk. Nor are we able to completely undermine the entire enterprise of a Seba vis-a-vis the Dalit Kos by applying Suffolk Rabban Lakula in both the first set and the second set. And therefore, we're left with no choice but to be machmir on all four Kosos. Now, there's an interesting Shiltei Giborim here on this sugya, and he writes that something to Rabban Lakula only applies when there's a machlokes b'divreim. But if it's a suffix b'kavanas divreim, then we have to be machmir, even on a drabbanan. So if you have two shitos, here we don't have two shitas. We really have the shita up front of Rav Nachman that the Dalit Kosos require a sefer. So there's no question that we need a sefer during Dalit Kosos. We have a suffix which said that doesn't come under the purview of suffix Rabban. Let's go on to the Gemara. Prakdan is someone who lies on his back and his face is towards the heavens. Lo shmei haseber. That's not called a sefer. That's not derech cherus. It's not comfortable to lie flat on your back. That's not what we call reclining. That is indicative of derech cherus. And hesebas yamin lo shmei heseba. To recline on your right side is not heseba because he won't be able to use his right arm to feed himself if he's leaning on his right arm. And furthermore, there's another element in the equation as to why heseba on the right side is excluded. Ella shema yakdim kana leveshet. There are two pipes. There's the kana, which is the windpipe, and the veshet, which is the esophagus. That's the where the food goes down, and there's a covering on top of the windpipe to allow the food to go down without choking. But if he's going to do a heseba on his right side, then we're afraid that that covering, which protects the kana, the windpipe, is going to be lifted, and as a result, he's going to choke. And yovel lidei sakana, that's a very dangerous situation. So that haveshet mitzad yamin, v'imyata asol yamino yochol lihipotach hakova sheme'al hakana. Since the esophagus is on his right side, if he leans on his right side, then it could be that the covering over the kana, over the windpipe, will be removed. And that'll cause a very dangerous situation. We have to do a save on the left side. Now, iter, yesev liyamin. If he's a lefty, then there is no sakana, so says the Shibbolei Aleket, and therefore he can lean on his right side. However, the Bir Halacha writes that that's enough yochid, and most of the poskim disagree with him, and everybody, even a lefty, should be leaning on his right side. Isha. So if we're talking about a single woman or an older woman who's living alone, she doesn't have a husband, then for sure she's going to require a saber. But Eitel Baila, in the presence of a husband, lo by a saber. In other words, the posture of reclining, which is derech cherus, is not appropriate for what we call Isha Emas Baila Oleha. So she's in a state of respect and awe. She has to kowtow to her husband. and therefore it's not appropriate for her to do a seba. The Rashbam adds here in the name of the Shiltos, Ein derech hanoshim lahasev. It's not the given etiquette for a woman to do heseba, to recline. And according to this, it's very possible that, as we said earlier, an almana or grusha requires heseba. It's not etiquette for her to do heseba. I'm sorry, let me get this straight. According to the Rashbam, who's saying that it's a matter of her presence, the husband, she's in the presence of her husband, then in the case of an almana grusha, she would require a seba. But according to the Shiltos, that women do not generally do a seba, then even an almana and grusha would not require a seba. In a case where her husband would not be makpid if she did a seba, she's an isha chashuva, and it could be that she's a yiras Hashem, she's bas gedolei ador, she's a Eishes Chayil, any of those high class categorizations, then she would require Beinetzel Aviv, a son in the presence of his father. He's also obligated covered in Yira and Or for his father. Boy has saved. Nevertheless, he requires his saving, and we assume that his father would not be mak. Iboilahu Talmud Eitzel Rabo Mam. What about a Talmud who is a guest at his Rebbe's house, or they're both, in any event, eating the Seder, the Suda together? Does the Talmud require Seba or not? Tashma, we're going to answer this question by quoting Amar Abaye ki Avina Beimar, when I was at the Seder of my Rebbe Rabbah, Zginan Abirche Dadod. We leaned on each other's knees. That's how we did a Seba. But ki Asina Lebei Rav Yosef, later on, when Rav Yosef was appointed the Rosh Hashiva after Rabbah, Amar Lan, he said, Lo tzrichusu, you don't need Heseba in my presence because it is a matzav, it's a situation of awe that's not appropriate for derech cherus, for Heseba. And if it's not appropriate, then there's an Isser of Heseba because of Es l'Rabbos Talmidei Chachamim and the honor and respect that you have to give a Talmid Chacham. If it's not respectful, and Mora Rabcha Kimora Shamai. So we don't demonstrate Cherus, which is a kind of matzav of Kalus Rosh in the presence of our Rebbe. Now this din applies even to a case of a Rebbe She'eno Muvhak, and we'll see it soon because the Gemara doesn't find any case in which there's a chiyuv on a Talmud to be mesav fnei Rabbo, unless it's Shulya Denagri, which we'll get to now. But as a general rule, there's no Aseba in front of a Rebbe, even if he's not your main Rebbe, he taught you most of your Torah. He's not a Rebbe Muvhak, no Aseba. Meisvei, the Gemara objects from a Brisa, Im HaKol Adam Meisiv. Vafilu Talmud Eitzarab. In the presence of everyone, a person who's obligated to a Seba will do a Seba on Leil HaSeder, even if it's a Talmud in the presence of his Rebbe. And Rav Yosef said, no, the Talmud should not be Meisiv in the presence of his Rebbe. And the Gemara answers, Ki Tanya Ahi, that which it says in the Brisa, that a Talmud is Meisiv Eitzel Rabbo, it doesn't mean that he is in the presence of his Rebbe who taught him Torah, but rather it's his master, so to speak, teacher, B'Shulya Denagri. He is learning as an apprentice a certain profession, and there's no requirement that in the presence of his teacher, Mora Rabcha, he has to be in a state of awe, and therefore he will be Mesiv. But in the case of someone who's in the presence of his Rebbe who taught him Torah, then there's a chiyuv of Mora Rabbo, and Mora Rabbo, Kimora Shamayim, and Heseba is inappropriate. Iboilu, the Gemara now raises the following suffix, Shamash, who is serving a chabura of people, and he's in the presence of the Baal Bayis, Does he do Haseba? Is he required to do Haseba? Is he not? Tashma, we learned in a statement of Rabbi Shimon Levi, Tiomar Hashama Sha'achal Kezais Matzik Shumesiv Yatza. Shamash will be eating kezayis of matzah with Haseba, and he is Yotze. And the Gemara is medayik from the language of Rabbi Shimon Levi, Mesiv in, lo Mesiv lo. He would not fulfill his obligation of matzah without Haseba. Shmamino, boy Haseba, Shmamino. And for this, we derive the conclusion that even a chamash requires Haseba. Now, 2 points that are interesting here that should be investigated is number one, what about yayin? Here, the emphasis is on matzah. And number two, is the language of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi indicative of the fact that Haseba is absolutely critical because he says, Kishu Mesiv Yotza. He only fulfills his obligation Mesiv. Or perhaps Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is talking about the mitzvah of Haseba as a separate independent mitzvah. And he will not fulfill that mitzvah. And the chiddush of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is that even if he forfeits that mitzvah, we would have to ask, would he forfeit, therefore, the mitzvah of matzah? Does matzah depend upon Haseba?